Hello everyone, and welcome to the Complete Python Programming course. In this video, we'll talk about variables and basic data types. In the previous lesson, we created our first Python program, which was a simple program that printed a statement to the screen. Let's recap that quickly. Print hello world and print I am learning programming. We run our program using Python 3 and file name, which is main.py. And Python ran my program and printed my statements to the screen. But Python can do much more than printing strings to the screen. But before we dive into that, let's try to learn something about variables and some basic data types. Think of variables as something that remembers values for you. To declare a variable, we use variable name equals the value we want Python to remember for us. Hello world. Notice that greeting starts with a letter, end with a letter, the word greeting written without any special additions to it, equals, and my string hello world is surrounded with single quotes. Now, what I can do with this variable is print greeting. In the first statement, I ask Python to remember the word hello world for me and store it for me in a variable I called greeting. In the second statement, I ask Python to go find the greeting and bring me the value stored in greeting. Let's run this program and see what it does. Python 3 main.py, and I will hit enter. Oh, I didn't save my file. Let's save our file first and run our program again. Python 3 main.py, and Python printed hello world to the screen. A note on using the terminal, I typed hello Python 3 main.py twice. If you want to repeat the last statement you executed, just hit key up on your keyboard and you should have the last statement, and you can just hit enter to execute it. Greeting is a variable of type string. I can declare as many variables as I want. Let's call it morning equals good morning, afternoon equals afternoon. Now, let's add good in here, good afternoon. Notice that my string is surrounded with single quotes. There is no difference if you use single or double quotes. It's just that if you use single at the beginning, you have to use single at the end. Double at the beginning, you use double at the end. Let's try to print these. Print morning and print afternoon. Let's run our code, and Python printed my three strings, my three variables. It's as simple as that. A note for people coming from different languages. Notice that in the assignment, I didn't have to add any semicolon at the end. Python doesn't require a semicolon at the end of your string. So you just declare your strings or your variables the way you write them, and greeting equals hello world, and that's it. It's one line, and you declare it this way. Now, the variable greeting hello world is of type string. Let's stay with that for a second. A string is a sequence of characters. Hello world is a sequence of characters starting with an H, ending with exclamation mark. Why is that important? Let's see how Python stores that for us. When we asked Python to create the string hello world for us, Python created slots and stored each character in a specific slot in order. So this is number 11. Notice that hello world starts with an H, ending with exclamation mark. Starting at index 0, Python stored the H at the first index, the E at the second index, and to the end. When computer makes sequences, they always start with 0, not with 1. So what or how can I use the sequence of character to my advantage? Let's go back to our code. Print greeting will print greeting to the screen. How about getting the first character of greeting? That's easy enough because it is a sequence. I can access a specific part of it. Brackets 0 will return the first character of my string. You are telling Python to give you a character at a specific index of your string. Let's run that and see what Python says. Clear and run our program, and Python returned H. Python returned only the first character of my string. Let's try to add after that the character at index 1. Let's see what Python says about that. It retained H as the first index and E for the second index, which is index 1. You can use any index, you don't have to go in order. Python will find the index that you want. Let's say index number 7 or 8. Let's print that. And Python returned the R, which is at index 8. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. The space is 5, 6, 7, and 8. Now that's simple enough. There is another thing to notice here. If you want the last character, there are many ways to access it, but the easiest way would be to go with -1. If H is 0, when you start from the end, you go with -1 and you print it. Let's print -1 and -2 and see what that returns. And print, and notice that for -1, Python returned exclamation mark, and for -2, Python returned the D, which is straightforward. -1 is the exclamation mark, -2 is the D, -3 is the L, -4 is the word. So when you start from the beginning, you start with 0 to the end. When you start from the end, you go with -1 to the end. If you want to know the length of your string, that's also easy. We'll talk about that in the next lesson. For now, Python allows us to do something more than that. How about accessing a range of characters? You can do that very easily by telling Python the start index, colon, the end index of whatever you want to access. So let's tell Python we want the characters between index 0 and 4. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Python should return hello to our screen. And let's print that. And Python returned hell instead of hello. Why? Because 0, 1, 2, 3, and Python stops before the last index you provided. If you want to access, think of it actually this way. 4 minus 0 is 4, so 1, 2, 3, 4. That's what will be returned. If you want hello world, you use 5. And let's try that now, and Python will return hello to our screen. One more example. Let's go with 7. 0 to 7, and that's hello W. We added 2, but the space has its own index, and W is at index, the index we wanted to access. Let's take one more example about that. Let's change the 0 to 2. Let's save our program and go and run our code. And notice what Python returned, starting from LLO space W. 7 minus 2 equals 5. LLO space W, 5 characters. Python returned the 5 characters in the range I supplied to Python. Strings aren't the only data type Python understands. Numbers are easy, and we will just see how we can use them in our code. My number. Notice that the variable name, my variable name now, starts with my underscore number. And let's make my number is 10. Another number equals 10 point, or let's make it 19.6. Now, notice I use underscore in my character. I will make a third one more, and I will add 10 here. And I will give it just any value, let's say 5. Variable names can contain letters, underscores, and numbers. That's all. You can use letters, underscores, and numbers. But your variable name should always start with a letter, like greeting, or an underscore. So when you say morning equals good morning, is valid. My number is valid. Another number is valid. One number and it has a 10 is valid, because you can use numbers, letters, and underscore in your strings. But you cannot do 100 greetings. Your string, your variable name cannot start with a number. It can start with a letter or underscore. Remember that. Don't try to create strings or variables with numbers at the beginning. Let's try to print good morning to see if it works. Let's remove that for now. Print morning. And Python should print that without any problems. Good morning. Now, if we create invalid 100 greetings equals whatever. Now let's try to run our code. I don't want to put that actually. I will just run the code without doing anything. The program should start and end without doing anything, but Python wouldn't like that. It will say 100 greetings, invalid syntax. Your variable name shouldn't start with a number. Let's go back to our numbers. Notice that I have my number and I have another number. Let's print them. Print my number and another number. Print, and Python will print my numbers as they are declared. The difference between my number and another number is that my number is of type integer. What is an integer? My integer and my float. Integers are whole numbers. They don't have decimal point. Floats have decimal point. They are called floating point numbers. And Python know how to deal with them. We will not talk about operators and how to use that now. We will talk about that in some other lesson. But for now, this is an integer. This is a floating point number. You will know the difference by having a decimal point in your number. Before we continue, I would like to talk about something we call comments. You can add comments to your code. When your code grows bigger, you might need to add comments so you would know what happened there. You would leave it for yourself or for other programmers who will look at your code, so you will give them an idea about what your code does. Comment in Python starts with a hash, and you can write your comment. This is a comment. This is another comment. Notice what happened here, that I declare the first comment and I declare the second comment, and I will just print greeting after that and see what Python does. When I run my program, Python printed hello world. My program started here. I declared a variable, another variable, another variables, 4 variables. Now Python sees this and it just ignores these 2 lines because they are comments. Another type of comment is multi-line comment. You can surround your multi-line comment with 3 quotes. This is multi-line comment, and you can write as much as you want in here without any problem. Python will ignore these comments and continue execution after the comments are gone. This is how you declare a comment. There is another way of declaring your comments. Actually, not another way. You can add them there. This is my number, my init, and this is my float. Notice that after this line, Python will read my variable, its value, and once it finds the hashtag, it will just ignore the rest of this line. We will see them in our code while we move, and you will understand them better that way. Another 2 simple data types I want to talk about is a type we call none. Now let me print that. Print nothing and clear and run my code. And Python printed none. Notice that none doesn't have quotes around it. It's actually a data type. Think of it as null or nil in other languages. If you don't have experience with other languages, we will talk about it in future lessons. Another data type is the Boolean data type. These are values that can be only true or false. Let's call it my bool, and let's go with true, and let's print my bool and run, and it said true. Notice that in the case of none and true, Python capitalized the first letter. I typed it with capitalization. It has to be capital letter, true, and the other one is false. Notice also it's capital letter. These are the Boolean types. None is the nil or the null in other languages. The Boolean type of Python is true or false, starting with a capital letter. Notice that for strings, I have quotes around my data. For anything else, I don't. For numbers, integers, floats, or Booleans, or the none, I don't have quotes around my variables. The last data type I want to talk about today, or actually 2 of them, is the lists. My list equals brackets dog, cat, and a horse. Let's print that and see what Python says. Print my list. Let me make it easy and call it my pets. For some reason, I have a horse. My pets. Let's run that. And Python printed it the same way I entered it. Dog, cat, and a horse. This data type is known in other languages as array, and in Python it's known as a list. It's actually, the implementation of it is actually an array, not a list. So let's see how that works in Python. A list is a sequence type that we declare, and Python take care of sequences for us. Notice that once I created my list, I put dog, cat, and a horse. What Python did, it added indices to my list starting at 0 and added dog at index 1. Think of it the same as a string, except that the index in this case is for the entire word. Now, let's go back to the code. Dog, cat, horse. How did I access a string? I did something like greeting and 0 to access the first character. For a list, I can do the exact same thing. 0, it will give me dog because the list itself, every value of the list has its own index. So if I print my pets 0, let's run that and see what Python says about that. And Python returned a dog. If we try with my pets 1, Python will return dog and cat. For 2, it will return the horse. It's actually just as simple as that. Here is a comment, and Python put this at index 0, this at index 1, and this at index 2. Very soon we'll have a whole lesson about lists. So this is just how you declare it, if you want to declare it. For now, try it on your computer, but we'll have a full lesson about lists and we'll learn more about them. Python syntax allow you to do this to make it much easier to read. So when you declare your list, you could do it this way. Every entry at its own line. Notice here there's a space, but you don't need that. You can declare your list like that. And if you run this code, let's save that program and run the code, and it will just work the same as on one line. Declaring lists is good when you use multiple line because it makes it much easier to read. When you program with languages like this, you don't worry about the file size, you worry about the readability. So this is much easier to read than when they were at the same line. But for now, I will add them at the same line and go. Now, notice that I'm always adding my pets space equals space and then the list. There is nothing wrong with removing that space. It just, this space makes it much easier to read, separating the equal with space at both sides, but you can do it any other way. The last data type I would like to talk about today is a dictionary. My pets. Again, I will remove the list for now. I can comment it like this, or I can actually just remove it from the screen totally. I would like to define my pets in a little different way. Braces, and let's add it this way. D dog, C cat, and H a horse. Let me put that in multiple lines to make it easier, but let me first explain. In our list, I'll bring back the list, my list, so we can see the differences. Dog, cat, and a horse. Notice I created a list by supplying Python with the values of each entry in my list, and Python added indices for me where it put dog at index 0, cat at index 1, and horse at index 2. When I created a list, and let's go back to the list first to see something. Notice that I separated these with colon. That's for illustration only here. But in the case of dictionary, I started my syntax with braces for the start, and then I added the index myself, and I added the value. This is not called index in this case. Index is when Python provided the index for me. Now I am providing the index and the value. In this case, it's called key. A dictionary is a key value store. You can store as many of these as you want. The syntax is the key, colon, the value, comma, and then the next values. Let's put this on multiple lines. Notice it looks like a phone book where the name of the person, and here you will have their phone number or email address or whatever. It's actually just a map between a key and its value. My lists, when I used my list, I accessed my list by accessing its index. This one doesn't have index. The dictionary has no index. It has instead a key. And to access it, I just print my pets, and instead of the index, I use the key I supplied. Let's run that and see what Python says. Clear and run that, and Python return a dog because I have dog at key D. Let's try to change that to a C, and Python return cat. There is nothing stopping you from doing these as a number. So 1, 5, and 16. And now if you want to access it, notice if it's a number, it's an integer. I didn't surround it with quotes. And you can access it also without quotes. So 1 should return my dog. And it goes the same for the cat, which is at index at key 5. And we run our code, and it will return a cat. Now you might think, why wouldn't I just do it the same as list and just go from there? You don't want that, because usually if you wanted something that has straightforward indexes starting from 0, you would go with a list. But other than that, the dictionary type has its own uses. We'll see that with examples in the next lesson. I hope this is not too much. What you need to do at home, create some variables, try to create some strings, some numbers, and try with the list, create some lists and see, just to get used to it. It's very good to type it in your text editor and run it in your terminal. If you get an error, try again. If you don't find the answer, we will just leave a comment and I will try to get them as soon as possible. Always practice at home and type as much as you can, because you will not learn it by just looking at the screen. You have to type it yourself. In the next lesson, we will talk about operators and see how we can apply operators to what we talked about today. If you like my videos, support the channel by subscribing. Until next time, have a great time.